I very much liken sugar to alcohol when talking about addiction, because if you are addicted to alcohol, you can't just have a little, because it will throw you into another cycle of dependency. And for some people, sugar and flour act like that on the brain. To get on the other side of a detox is very empowering because you get so much of your brain space back. All that brain space that was taken up with could I, should I want, I don't want, is just gone because the cookie stops talking to you.
Hello, and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, where you'll hear one conversation after another that can generate aha moments and open up whole new landscapes of possibility for you. We are going to get started with an amazing interview today. We have a guest who is an expert in a topic that can affect our daily lives, and she's talking about it in fresh ways. Dr. Andrea Grayson is a behavior change communications consultant who teaches about public health communication in the Master of Public Health program at the Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. And I discovered Andy when I found her book. So this is an amazing book these days. It's The Sweet Tooth Dilemma. And some of you know that I am by trade for 30 years a dentist. So of course I have a whole different take on the sweet tooth dilemma, literally. And here's the thing. I know that we all need to know more about how sugar works in our bodies, not just our teeth, but just in our everyday moods, what we crave, how we feel about ourselves, all just way more than that. But what I know is that we all could know more, and we don't like the teachers we've run into. I hate to say it like that, but it's really easy to run into people who are really preachy about sugar in our life, or they make it too complicated or whatever. And Dr. Andy is not that. She has a wonderful take. In this book, her points are short and sweet, and they're written in a way that you and I can understand. And I think we could live different lives if we weren't prisoner to the sugar in our lives. And I see Dr. Andy shaking her head, and that's what's in this book. So thank you and welcome, Dr. Andrea Grayson.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Great
Cool.
introduction.
Okay. So, I've read a lot of books about sugar. You can only imagine being a dentist for 33 years. I've tried every single thing we can do to motivate folks and have people sort of pay attention to this really, really important part of their life. But I tell you, when I came across your book, I really had to interview you about your thoughts because I think you've got it super concise, not preachy. There's so many aha moments in this book, Andrea. The thing is that would you say I'm not making it oversimplified when I say that, if we understand that we have this craving for sugar because of our evolution, like 35,000, 200,000 years ago, the most important thing we could do was find a source of sugar, just calories in our diet every single day?
That's absolutely right. We're biologically wired to like the sweet taste because the sweet taste represents calorie density.
Right.
And so our brain seeks out calorie density because it's been a matter of our survival. The problem is that sugar, as we know it, does not exist in nature. Yes, fruits have fructose and some glucose as well, but fruits are seasonal and they're in every part of the planet all year round.
Right.
And now we are faced with high concentrations of sugar everywhere we go.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a matter of survival. The sugar manufacturers have literally hijacked our biology to put the sugary, refined food things in front of us everywhere so that we just want it all the time.
It's super important. And what you're saying there is just, let's start there. Originally, the only source of sugar that we could come upon were natural sweet sources in plants and fruits. And like you say, that wasn't available all the time. And then maybe once in a while we'd brave a beehive that we came across, and pretty much that's it. And here we were, always calorie deprived, pretty much during most of our evolution. So, that was just a quick source and we would eat all that we could. But now it's everywhere. It's just ubiquitous in our food. Sometimes I'll read labels because I'm borderline diabetic and I'm just amazed at the foods that have sugar in them. Why do we need that in here?
It's kind of hard to know what came first. The American propensity for a sweet preference or they're making everything sweet and now we want it more. It's
Right.
hard to tell, but there are stark differences between the many manufacturers' formulas in Europe and in the US, for example, with the US being much more sweet.
Hmm.
So I think they're
Yes.
catering to our propensity for, and we've been trained to go after the sweeter taste.
Oh, absolutely. I've been fortunate to live in Italy and Spain in my lifetime, and it was just nothing like the food landscape that we have here, full of all this calorie dense nutrition void foods, right? Like that's the other part of the equation here. It's not like we're getting a lot of nutrients in any of the things that give us all the sugar most of the time.
That's true.
Okay, so let's get to our very first question, which is more of a statement, and I'll let you react to it and get us all oriented. Flour is sugar. I don't think that we're putting that part of the equation together. Like, even if we are dutifully reading labels and we don't see sugar, if we see flour, that's sugar too. Talk to us about this whole world of what is sugar.
That's huge. So when you say what is sugar, we mostly think of white table sugar,
Mhm.
which is about 50% glucose and 50% fructose.
Right.
And it goes through an intense manufacturing process. So we might think, well, sugar is natural, but it actually has a dozen chemicals in the process, and it's highly concentrated from its original plant form. And there's a long story about thinking about it as being a natural thing. But the thing about flour and why it needs to be considered a sugar is that refined flour, which also goes through a highly processed process to become a white fluffy powder, is that it begins digesting immediately in the mouth.
Right.
And by the time it hits your stomach, your gut, it's already broken down into glucose, into its formative
Molecules.
molecules. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it affects our blood sugar very much the same way as table sugar would. And in fact, according to the glycemic index, which is the speed at which our blood sugar changes according to what we eat, or rises in accordance with what we eat, that whole grain bread has a higher glycemic index than a can of soda does. It might be because of the speed with which we consume a piece of bread. It might be because of the speed with which it breaks down, but it's very much affects our blood sugar and needs to be considered as a sugar.
Mm. Back to our original starting point there, we have the same physiology as people in the Stone Age did, who were, probably desperately hungry most of the time. Also, there's this neuroscience to how we're driven to eat more once our blood sugar spikes, and then it falls just as fast, and then we're like searching for food again. That's so natural, right? That's just what the people in the Stone Age did, right?
Sure. I've identified 5 different ways that we are, well, 5 plus 2 different ways that we are become dependent on sugar. And that insulin roller coaster is definitely one of them, because our insulin rises to match how much glucose is in our bloodstream, because we need the insulin to shuttle the glucose out of our bloodstream and into our cells. And
Okay.
so, but when it does that, it leaves a lull. And so then that's, a lot of people have a 3 o'clock in the afternoon need for a snack because their blood sugar has
Right.
gotten low and they need to pump up again.
Mm. And so, I'll just tell my own stories through this because I think they probably were just average folk kind of stories. I was a dentist, as I mentioned, for a lot of years. And, I would rush through my day and very often never eat. Just zooming through the entire day. And by 5:15, 5:30, when I drove out of that office, man, I don't even know what my blood sugar level must have been. But I was like incapable of not stopping at a quick stop for maybe a bag of chips or something, right? And that it kind of this whole craving for sugar hijacks our brain in some ways, and that would have been a good thing back in the Stone Age, right? But is that true? Like there's some real neuroscience to this.
Sugar affects the brain in a lot of ways. One of the primary ways is through what I call the pleasure pathway. And that every time, as I mentioned earlier, we're biologically wired to like the sweet taste. So our mouth goes woo, and our brains light up like a Christmas tree, and it's like, wow, that was great. And so we end up seeking pleasure all the time. And a lot of people get into a routine of pleasure seeking in the sense of, oh, I deserve a treat, or I've been good, or I worked out, so I can have a treat. When really that's just the brain and maybe even the bad gut bacteria wanting to be lit up again.
Mm. And it's as simple as that. Like, it's not about a character flaw.
I often say to people, whatever you're going through, it's not your fault. Your brain and your biology have been hijacked. And
Mhm.
you sort of went with it because we didn't really understand it or know better. And then it's really much more challenging to unravel those habits of
Right.
the 3 o'clock lull, the feeling a reward, the family rituals that have gotten us into routines that are harder to break.
Mhm. And while willpower is going to be useful in that first stage where we break free from the grip of this whole cycle, again, it's not a character flaw. Like, it's not willpower that's going to keep us safe. And somebody with low willpower is going to be just doomed.
Willpower is such an interesting question. And I like to help people shift the conversation from willpower to resist that which we want. Our brains are saying, ooh, I want that cookie, and shifting it to the will to be free, the will to change the relationship we have with this object that is ultimately doing us harm. So instead of putting the emphasis on the moment and willpower and resisting, to really step back and reframe and think, I want to use my will to be healthy. I want to use my will to stay focused on my goals. I want to use my will to feel good about myself without
Mhm.
needing a treat to feel better.
Yeah. Okay. So this is not just coming from some hypothetical world for you. You have your own story about this, right? Can you share a bit of that with us?
Sure. So, as mentioned, I work in public health and I teach about behavior change and public health communications in the Master of Public Health program at the Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. And in 2016, I was researching a book on the role of advertising and the cultural ubiquity of eating sugar, snacks, and processed food, and the role that plays in normalizing several generations of eating processed foods.
Mhm.
And yet, I was in complete denial of my own sugar addiction until one day I was in the grocery store finished my shopping, and I was looking for something to eat on the car ride home, which is a habit I used to do. And as I was reaching for the dark chocolate peanut butter cups, I had the thought, oh, you can have that. You worked out today. And while that was a true statement and something I'd said to myself 100 or 1,000 times before, because I was so deeply into my research on the sugar industry, basically, I heard it as a voice that was separate from me. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I said, who is that talking? It's not my logical linear mind that's talking, because I have other goals than to be having sugary treats in the middle of the day. And that's when I did a pivot on my research. And I stopped working on policy and advertising and culture and started looking at the biology. How is it possible that sugar could be talking to me? And that's when I discovered the world of the microbiome and how in the gut is good bacteria and bad bacteria. And the good bacteria feed on fiber, and the bad bacteria feed on sugar and flour. And when that bad bacteria needs to be fed, it will say anything. You deserve it. You've been good. Why not? You can. It'll say anything to get you to eat something that'll feed that good bacteria. And that's what's really set me on my journey. And it took me 2 years to feel like I had a safe relationship with sugar.
I want to just support something that I heard you say in our pre-call and in this interview as well, is that there is a future where things that are normally sweet taste just divine. like a peach or an apple or whatever, that we stop noticing because we're so off the charts with that bowl of cereal that we start our day with, or off the chart with Nutella on a piece of bread. Like once you get rid of all that off the chart stuff, you can start to, have experienced that with the glucose monitor for sure.
Absolutely. Reacclimating your taste buds and
Hmm.
your the pleasure amount of pleasure, because that's one of the hallmarks of overuse, is that you need more and more to get the same hit of dopamine.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not just one bite of pie. You need to have two slices or three
Yeah.
different kinds to get the same amount of pleasure. Yeah.
So talk to us just a little bit more about dopamine, because most people have heard that word before, but I'm not sure they would have heard it in context of this. I mean, social media controls us by creating little hits of dopamine. Talk to us a little bit more about dopamine because it's so key.
So much is about dopamine because it's a brain chemical or neurotransmitter, and it's generated in a couple of different parts of the brain, but it gives the feeling of pleasure. But
Mhm.
in addition to the feeling of pleasure, it's related to motivation. So dopamine not only wants us to have ice cream, but it gets us in the car to go to the store to buy the ice cream. So it's a whole process that has been developed so that we pursue those things that give us pleasure, and originally related to survival. And now that we're in an overabundant world, it gets us to desire objects and motivates us to buy them.
Right. Right.
So when we're dialing back on sugar, one of the first things people say to me is, "Oh, I could never do that. I don't want to. I don't want to feel deprived." And it's something that needs to be reframed,
Mm.
because yes, you're not going to have the thing, but we've trained our brains to get pleasure from these quick hits of, like you said, highly jacked up responses from, like, a piece of chocolate is an immediate quick hit of dopamine that lights up our taste
Mhm.
buds, lights up our brains, and we've become used to that easy access, so that it's harder to receive pleasure from the simple things like
Yeah.
roasted vegetables or even stepping outside on a beautiful day and taking an extra breath of fresh air. And that's I talk a lot about pleasure in my programs, because ultimately that's what we need to do is retrain our brains to enjoy the simple pleasures of being in our bodies all the time, because we have beautiful sounds of music, the rays of sunshine, the way fabric feels on our skin. There are just so many simple pleasures around us all day long, that if all we can think about is the chocolate at 3 o'clock, then we're missing out on a whole range of pleasures that are available to us at all the time.
That is such a big point. This is exactly why I wanted to interview you. That is such a great point, because a lot of us are trying to get back to simpler lives. Like we're trying to do it in every other possible way, but we've got this sort of real elephant in the room. If we're constantly being driven by the dopamine extremes that come our way on things like social media or our sugar intake or other things. When we come back, we're going to talk to Dr. Andrea Grayson about all these nuanced little changes that we can make because we want to, because we are heading towards a better future, not with a sense of loss. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So, if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple.
First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness.
Okay, we're back with Dr. Andrea Grayson, and she is helping us understand the role of sugar in our lives, but not in like a punitive way. Like once we just get this, we become like sort of masters of the universe. I can imagine it's like a superpower to just understand the game being played by sugar and maybe industry. Maybe the food industry is playing a game with us as well. So I want to talk about this thing called the Bliss Point, but first, I want you to talk about the media environment.
Absolutely. My background initially was as a media producer, and I studied about the media and technology and its impact on our lives in graduate school. And so I became very interested in the role of our media environment on our health. Not only the physical action of what being attached to screens all the time, but the messaging that's coming through those screens. And one of the things that I've become aware of is the way that our media environment, specifically advertising, normalizes the consumption of sugary foods and processed foods. You know, after 70 years of seeing kids eat cereal on TV or on our devices now,
Mhm.
we think eating cereal for breakfast is normal. But in fact, cereal for breakfast is one of the worst things a child could eat, not only for their health, but for their mental focus and their energy in school. And so we need to hold our media environment culpable in some way. And yet it's a free market economy. You don't have to watch it if you don't want to, like all of those things. But the fact is that our cultural environment is being played out on screens now. And the screen world is a commercial medium. And so if you're watching something, we're delivering an audience to advertisers. And so it's upon us to develop media literacy skills, really. Media literacy skills are very directly related to health literacy skills because we need to be critical thinkers about what we're consuming.
All right. So once we sort of understand the game that's being played with our minds in our media landscape, there's just simply understanding our physiology a little bit more. Talk to us about the bliss point. This is a very important point for us to understand about ourselves, the bliss point.
Absolutely. There are a couple of different ways to talk about it, but the bliss point is a technical term that's used in the food engineering business to indicate the maximum amount of sugar and maybe in some products sugar, salt, and fat that evoke a pleasurable response before it becomes too sweet, too salty, too fatty.
Okay.
So the way it's been described has been they'll have focus groups or interviews with kids, and they'll put out 3 or 4 or 5 different cookies. And each one has a successive amount more of certain ingredients. And they're testing to which is the one that brings them the most pleasure without them being, ooh, that's too sweet. And when they find that cookie, they find that formula, then they call that's the bliss point, and that's what they build their formulas around. So it's very scientific. But on the flip side, I would say that we've trained our taste buds to like the sweet taste. We've trained our brains to light up, the dopamine to light up with a certain amount of sugar. So when you reset your taste buds and your brain stimulation, even roasted broccoli tastes sweet. Water can taste sweet. So you can reacclimate your taste buds to be much more sensitive, which is really what makes living a low sugar lifestyle sustainable, is because we
Yeah.
find pleasure in vegetables, we find pleasure in fruits, we find pleasure in the simply prepared foods.
It's so true. I'll reveal something here to folks. I'm wearing something here called a continuous glucose monitor, and I'm on the borderline of diabetes. It runs in my genes. There's no way I'm escaping it on both sides. But what I thought to do was sort of understand my own physiology, because we can accept a whole lot of things told to us, but it's somehow knowing specifically about how your body handles white bread or wine or pasta or potatoes or whatever. And I'm telling you, I've been using this for 4 months, and it is such a life changing experience. I would recommend it to anyone, whether at any age, with any genetics. It's just a really revealing journey into your own, how your own body works. And my body's as unique as anyone's that I've learned. I can eat pasta without getting a blood sugar spike, but I can't touch Mexican food. I can drink red wine, but I can't drink white wine. Like, we don't know why our bodies all react differently, but now after 4 months, I am living an entirely different emotional life because my moods aren't going up and down with my sugar intake, or high and low, and a lot of other stuff. Like, I, there's where I want you to start with this. If we only knew. Talk to me about the things that sugar can affect. I've already mentioned our emotional lives. There's links to that. Talk to us about the things that you really want us to know that could be not so good because we're on this sugar roller coaster all day long.
Well, there's short term and long term. The short term symptoms, mood swings, depression, anxiety, very much linked to gut health and blood sugar swings, sleep problems, brain fog, skin issues, joint pain. Well, because there are two main ways that sugar does damage in the body. One is insulin resistance, which we've been talking around. And then the other is inflammation. So sugar is pretty linked to causing inflammation in the gut, which over time becomes systemic or chronic inflammation, which can spread throughout the body. And that inflammation chronic inflammation is associated with every chronic disease, notably heart disease, which is the number one killer in the United States of both men and women, arthritis, cancers, depression,
Oh, depression, that's
Alzheimer's.
huge. Yes.
Yeah, just everything is exacerbated by chronic inflammation.
Okay, so if you hear any of the things that Dr. Andy just mentioned, let it just raise your eyebrows, because if you can start using something like a continuous glucose monitor to unravel the other complexities in your life, like she mentioned, sleep apnea and depression and all sorts of things. Wow, it just unlocks a landscape of potential that you don't even know you have. I can tell you, I sleep 1,000 times better now that I'm not on the roller coaster ride. My relationships are better with my daughter, who's my co-founder of the website, because you get two of us, maybe one high and one low, and we have to work together. I mean, think how that works in our work environments. If everyone's on their own journey all day long with blood sugar affecting their moods, I don't even want to know about the complexities that could be bringing into our life. Okay, so we need to hit one more topic before we start talking about solutions, and that is, if we haven't already talked all around it, is this process of addiction. Because addiction is a big word, and it's a bad word in our society in most cases, but sugar is probably one of the most addictive substances we could possibly run across. Am I right?
Well, it affects the brain very much the way other stimulants do. So
Mhm.
there's been some research and brain scans that show that sugar lights up the brain 6 times more than cocaine does. So in terms of the pleasure boost, 6 times more from sugar. Now, there are things in cocaine that make it more addictive otherwise, but on the pleasure front, it's front and center. And you're right that addiction is a spectrum. And I very much liken sugar to alcohol when talking about addiction, because we understand that some brains are, it's like an alcoholic switch goes on. Some brains respond to alcohol in a way that other brains don't. And if you have the alcoholic, and I don't know if it's specifically genes or genetic just disposition in general, but if you are addicted to alcohol, you can't just have a little,
Right.
because it will throw you into another cycle of dependency. And for some people, sugar and flour act like that on the brain,
Mm-hmm.
that they have obsessive thoughts. They're almost not eating for the pleasure anymore. They're eating to relieve the pain of craving.
Mm-hmm.
Just like an alcoholic doesn't know this, they don't want to drink, but they have to relieve the pain of wanting. So some people have that. Some people have the addictive brain.
Mm-hmm.
But just like alcohol, you can do a lot of damage with alcohol before being an alcoholic. And I think very similarly, there are a lot of people who do a lot of damage with sugar and flour without being food addicts.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding that there's a spectrum and being self-reflective enough to understand, maybe this binging isn't so good for me. Maybe just because I want it all the time, maybe that should be a clue that there's something off with my hormonal balance or my chemical imbalance or my gut bacteria that I could look at, because I can tell you that once your gut bacteria, once these things come back into balance, once you've removed the sugar from your system long enough so that you can recalibrate all of these bodily systems that are influenced by it, you have distance and you have empowerment and you have choice, because
So
the cookie
true.
stops talking to you. It doesn't say, yeah, you can have me, you've been good today. There's no more conversation. You just see it as a bunch of flour and sugar, and then you get to choose. Do I want this really today? Yes or no? And then it's absolute choice, as opposed to engaging in that willpower discussion, like I want it, but I shouldn't have it, and just one won't hurt, but then I'll want more. And
Yes.
yeah, to get on the other side of a detox is very empowering, because you get so much of your brain space back. All that brain space that was taken up with could I, should I want, I don't want, is just gone.
That's a really, really important sentence for all kinds of things that might have us stuck. That getting on the other side of a detox. How did you say that? It was so beautiful.
Well, getting onto the other side of a detox creates space and freedom to make choice.
Right. Space in our brain.
Mm.
I really think that's an important point. Think how caught up we are in thinking about the next meal or the quick stop and whether I'm going to get there on time or all those things that our brain space and then there's just family challenges that are created by a whole family whose moods are going up and down related to sugar, right? Like that takes up a lot of brain space.
Yeah, there's a lot of, well, now we're coming into the holiday season. There's lots of family rituals and family dynamics around the food. And one of the pathways that I talk about is social ritual and habits, because we have, our lifetimes of having Aunt Jenny's pumpkin pie at the holidays. And not only do we have warm, fuzzy feelings about it, but if we don't eat it, she's going to feel bad. So separating out the family feelings and the relationships and decoupling that with the food is a bit of a process, because we have these emotional attachments, these Pavlovian responses to our mother's brownies or somebody's special pie, that we don't want to deprive ourselves. And just noticing how much is actually the attraction to the food, and how much is the emotional attachment to the whole situation and the family and the person that made it for you. And it's just a great opportunity for reflection.
Yeah, it's huge. I just before we started our interview today, I was having coffee with my husband. He's going off. It's just so people know when we're recording this is about 1 week before Thanksgiving in 2023. And then the holidays thereafter and all that. And we are major cooks in our family. Just like I was back home in Illinois on the family farm one year, and my brother and my sister, who also live on the farm, and we each cooked a turkey. That's how much food we're into. We each cooked a turkey because we wanted to have a turkey off. By the way, my sister won. My brother's didn't get cooked in time. He was frying one, but that's a separate problem. The frying world. But what I mentioned that for is, my husband and I are sitting there this morning thinking about our Thanksgiving meal, which we have time tested 35-year-old recipes for that I learned when we lived in Kentucky from some of the best cooks in the South. Oh my gosh. And nobody was caring about sugar, salt, and fat in in those days, let alone, and they were beautiful recipes. And we were trying to think, now that I have 4 months under my belt with the continuous glucose monitor, can I even have a bite of the corn pudding? What do we do about the sweet potato with covered in maple syrup and pecans, all the
Mm.
things. It was just a funny discussion. And that makes me think about this sense of loss. I've talked to a lot of people here on the podcast about various aspects of our climate mitigation solutions out there. And of course, we talk about solutions on this podcast. So we got to get to that. But I think the number one thing we got to do is we can't walk around with our knuckles dragging, always in a sense of loss, with a sense of loss about the better choices that we can make, because we know more in this world, whether it's about climate change or our sugar intake. So first, talk to us about the detox process and maybe why cold turkey, how that factors in there. And then we'll talk about how you've got some great things that kind of override the sense of loss. But first, talk to us about the detox and this whole concept of cold turkey.
So detoxing from sugar is very similar to detoxing from coffee, if you've ever had to do that before.
Okay.
So you're good for a couple of days, and then you might get a headache. Then you might have lethargy. Then you might be cranky. And detoxing from sugar can have additional symptoms like tongue coating. I'm not really sure why that happens, but some people get it, or a metallic taste in their mouth.
Mm.
And that process comes usually between it starts around 3-4 days in and can last maybe up to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. It depends on how deep into it you are. But after that period is over, that's when the work begins of figuring out what your habits are and all the attachments that you have, and figuring
Mm.
out new rituals, and how much you rely on snacking to relieve boredom or procrastination. And you can't really do that until the food stopped talking to you. And advocate for a cold turkey. I don't advocate for cold turkey. If you're a soda drinker, you need to dial back on how much added sugar you're having before you try and go cold turkey. Because if you try and go cold turkey from having a couple of sodas a day, it's going to be hard. There's so many bodily systems that you're going to be trying to be working against, because not the least of which is caffeine, because sodas all have caffeine in them. So I recommend people dial back. Like if you were going to give up coffee, you wouldn't go from 5 cups a day to 0. You would go to 4 cups, and then 3 cups, and then 2 cups, and then 1, and then half decaf, and then go cold turkey. So I recommend a similar process of tapering, depending on where you're starting from, to get down to a minimum of whatever that is for you before you try go cold turkey. And the reason why you go cold turkey on both sugar and flour is that if you have just a little bit, you're going to affect your blood sugar.
Right.
If you have just a little bit, you're going to affect your dopamine. If you have just a little bit, you're going to affect your gut bacteria. And you really want to reset all of those things so that you're starting with a clean slate.
We can't have this conversation without talking about what are we doing to the next generation, because I mean, this is a child development issue too, if we're not careful, and we are creating a physiology in little tiny tykes.
Absolutely. This is an area that's relatively new to me, which is understanding the impact of excess sugar in utero. And there's some research that shows that women who are pregnant who have excess amounts of sugar, and I'm not sure exactly what's considered excess. It might be a couple of sodas a day. I need to find that out, dig a little deeper into what the amount actually is, but that those children were more susceptible to fatty liver disease, which is one of the adult onset results of having too much sucrose and fructose and glucose in the diet. So, I mean, hopefully there will be a point where hopefully every pregnant woman knows that they shouldn't smoke and shouldn't drink while they're pregnant. And I'm hoping that they also learn soon, as soon
Yeah.
as we can get the public health messaging out there, that excess sugar should also be avoided while pregnant because it puts your children at risk for chronic disease.
Mm. Okay, that's a real aha moment there too. Yeah, lovely. Okay. So, there's got to be some myths that we're all operating, that we're making choices, we're making decisions about. This whole one of them I know that you'd like to talk about is calories in, calories out myth. So, take us on a little myth busting journey here.
Sure. There are several myths that sort of in the zeitgeist of American culture that keep us hooked. And one of them is calories in, calories out. And while from a physics point of view, calories are energy. So if you think about it just in terms of energy quantity, we need to burn more calories than we're consuming if we want to lose weight. But all calories are not created equal. And if weight loss is your interest, then you need to understand having elevated blood sugar is going to keep your body from seeking out fat. I mean, it's pretty simple that if your body runs on glucose, it can also run on ketones, but for the most part, it runs on glucose. And there's glucose in your bloodstream, it's not going to go try and get energy from the stored fat. So that's why keeping your blood sugar low is a really important feature of most weight loss programs, because otherwise you're going to plateau because your body's just not going to switch over to be fat burning. It's going to stay a glucose burning, sugar burning.
Hmm.
So that's one major myth, is that all calories are not created equal and have different impacts on your metabolism.
So
Another
we can't just count calories and expect it all to work out fine.
That's right. And
Okay.
many people plateau. They need to, yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, what's another one?
Another myth is it's just a sweet tooth. Many people, physicians included, haven't really caught up with the idea that this can really do damage. And what's wrong with a little treat once in a while? And I'd be the first to say there's nothing wrong with a little treat once in a while, but what else did you eat that day? If you started your day with a scone or a muffin, and then you had a sandwich, and then you had a snack, and then for dinner you have a well-balanced meal, and then you have a treat, that treat is coming after a whole day long of that blood sugar roller coaster. And so context matters
Yeah.
in that case.
I have to say also, we've got some myths around what are good foods and what are not. The other day I was just zooming through my day and I was running through town. We live in the town where the Ben and Jerry's ice cream is made in Vermont. So, Dr. Andy is a Vermonter as well. She's in Burlington, Vermont, but St. Albans is the Ben and Jerry's. We even have Ben and Jerry's cows in our meadow. So don't we have the Co-op Creamery, this wonderful farm store? So I was starving. I ran in there. I looked at this whole store worth of food. Like, what can I eat? With my glucose monitor, what's not going to set that afly? Every day is a new experience in trying to see what new foods make things go crazy or I can eat. I had not tried yogurt. Good brand of yogurt with fruit in it. Not had that in 4 months. I don't know why, but I hadn't tried it and I figured, oh, that's got to be good for you. My blood sugar went up to 300.
Ooh.
And that was
Yes.
a
Some
nice
brands
brand.
some
Organic.
brands of fruit sweetened yogurt have, I think, as many as 11 or 12 teaspoons of sugar in there,
Yeah,
depending on the size and the type. Yeah.
it was delicious. Luckily, luckily, I'm after 4 months, of course, I know what I can eat without too much of a spike. But my point is, what just name off the top of your head some other foods. Like I kind of get a little nutty, probably it's my dental background, and I even found myself doing this 15 years ago when I had kids in sports. But when we're handing a Gatorade over the back seat to our kids every hour through a whole day's worth of soccer tournaments or whatever. Oh my god, that is gonna be how many teaspoons of sugar is that all day long? Like, what's that doing to their physiology? Tell me some more. Like, we think sports drinks are healthy, but most of us know they're not. What else is kind of mythologically not healthy, but we think it is?
Granola and granola bars.
Mm.
Those are usually loaded with sugar and
Right.
oil and all sorts of things like that. Whole grain bread, there is a place for bread, particularly the flourless breads, but the whole grain era just got us eating a lot of refined
Hmm.
carbohydrates
Yep.
that spike our blood sugar. So I
Yep.
think whole grain does not mean healthy. And a lot of cereal manufacturers advertise, you know, 100% whole grain or whole grains inside or something like that. So
Yeah.
they're they might have started out whole, but they've been processed and refined into a flour to make those Cheerios.
Right. Ah, I miss cereal in the morning.
Yeah.
But not so bad. I have amazing breakfast every morning with my husband now. I, cook one kind of egg after another with different omelets and this and that. And there are wonderful choices. I really don't feel like it's a sense of loss at all. In fact, it almost seems like a gain because it's forced me to get more curious and be a
Mm.
better cook and try things that I wouldn't have thought I had time to cook ourselves and that sort of stuff. So I think on balance, I want to encourage people to give this conversation that we're having some real thought and don't think of it in a light and as a loss. Think of it as all this possibility is just sitting there that we're not availing ourselves of.
Such a good point. Such a good
Yeah.
point. It's easy to focus initially on what you can't have,
Right.
but when you think about what you can have and how you're going to cook up that cauliflower rice in a way
Mhm.
that's going to make it feel satisfying,
Lovely.
or what flavors go well with what
Mhm.
vegetables. And yeah, can open up a whole realm of creativity in the kitchen for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So if this conversation had been just 3 minutes long, like, I'm sure you look at the TV once in a while or your digital life, you might get exposed to stuff and you see all this swirling food chaos happening and the sugar chaos. Like, and you might put your head in your hands. Like, if there was just one thing that you could say, what I really wish people knew, what would it be?
I guess flour is sugar would be one of those
I
things,
think so too.
because I, for one, was more of a carb addict than a sugar addict. I didn't
Mhm.
eat candy, but cookies, pasta, pizza, all the flour products were really what stuck me. So a lot of people might say, "Oh, I didn't eat a lot of sugar," but they're addicted to bread. So I think that would be one of the big takeaways, is understanding that refined carbohydrates, flour is sugar,
Yeah.
basically. So that would
Mhm.
be one. And the other thing in terms of action items is read labels until you know which brands are loaded with sugar. Other products that are loaded with sugar are often canned tomato sauce,
Mhm.
salad
Mhm.
dressings, commercial salad dressings, yogurts, instant oats. Oats are one of the most glycemic grains out there, rolled oats. So if
Mhm.
you're a real oatmeal fan, I would recommend switching to steel cut oats,
Right.
which take a long time because that leaves the grain intact and just cuts it in half, as
Mhm.
opposed to rolling it out and making those starches really readily available to you. So the only thing about steel cut oats is that it's like rice. It takes a long time to cook. So if you soak it overnight, then it cooks up really quickly in the morning. So that would be a
Good.
good tip.
Good. And I have to say, once again, I'll show the book. The Sweet Tooth Dilemma. You can't miss it. It has a lovely little half-eaten lollipop there on the front. It's a quick page turner. You could just take morning with coffee. The sections are really, she makes her point, which is really refreshing to me because a lot of times people go way deeper than they need to or way broader and, just make a point and then it sticks in my mind and I can use it. So, thank you so much for joining us on the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I know this conversation is going to land on people and they'll think this might be something I can control. There's so much in our life that we can't control. It seems like chaos is just stranger than it ever was in our lives. But there is so much that we can, and I'm always encouraging people to find perspectives and fresh insights that help them open up new landscapes of possibility. And you're certainly doing that with this book. So thank you, Dr. Andrea Grayson.
Well, thank you, Dr. Linda. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity and your great questions and perspective and experience in this area. It really makes for a rich conversation.
Yeah. We've got to help each other.
Yeah,
That's the thing. There's 1,000 people listening to this podcast who could teach you and I a thing or two. And I think that's the direction that most of the thought leaders that I'm interviewing here on the podcast are going. Is we're forming new constellations of interaction and collaboration, and we're listening for the helpers in this world instead of the chaos builders. That's the choice that when people ask me what I really wish people knew, I really wish people knew that when we can't control so much in our life, we can control what we give our attention to. And when we do that and we look for the helpers in the world like you, we are going to have more rich lives. So
that's
thank
a
you so much for your work in this world.
well, and thank you for yours. It's a beautiful mission.
Okay, I hope everyone will head over to the Goodness Exchange. You can enjoy the website for free, but if you can, help us sustain the Goodness Exchange because it's bringing great idea folks like Andrea and the hundreds of other people we've interviewed to the forefront so you can enjoy a spring in your step every day. And of course, the Goodness Exchange website is full of thousands of articles and links to what's right with the world, the things that could be rising to the top of our news feeds. But the way the internet is structured, back to that dopamine thing, we're just not going to. We're not going to see all the goodness and progress that's in the world unless we seek it. And at the Goodness Exchange, you can find something every day to improve your worldview. And I have a feeling that changes everything too when your worldview is more expansive. So thank you. I hope all the connections that Dr. Andrea and I shared with you today carry you through your week and you start finding all the wonder and possibility in what we just talked about. Have a great day.